It's 10:01, the morning of Tuesday, October 12th. My name is Adele Phillips, and I am the Flood Mitigation Planner with the Department of Natural Resources. This is the third meeting of our Plan Development Committee for the 2022 statewide flood hazard mitigation plan. This is a very important project for the state of Nebraska and particularly for the Department of Natural Resources. This meeting today is open to all floodplain administrators, emergency managers, various state and federal agency representatives. To attend this meeting, you will have registered for the meeting, and that registration is what is allowing us to keep attendance. For those of you who are joining in with multiple others from a conference room or are attending without having gone through that online registration process, if you could enter your name and your position and your agency in the chat, we will add you to our registration log. But again, only those of you who have not gone through the online registration process and are attending from a conference room with others, please do that. Yeah, and then again, as mentioned earlier, those of you who are joining in via telephone or show as a telephone number in the attendees list, please, if you're able to, link that number to your computer or other access name, so we don't have sort of a duplicate attendance record, or you may be able to change your name and enter your full name as your alias instead of that telephone number. Okay, so who all is here? Again, we've advertised this meeting to emergency managers throughout the state, floodplain administrators throughout the state, and many state and federal agencies that have an interest in commenting on the various content that we're covering today. And there is a lot of content to cover today. So let's move forward. Oh, and I should note at this slide, if you have technical issues, please contact Michelle York. She's with the Department of Natural Resources. She just waved if you can see the videos, but you can send her a direct chat, or you can email Michelle, that's Michelle with one L, .york@nebraska.gov for assistance. Okay, so from here, I'm going to pass the mic to John Engel, who is with HDR, and they are a consultant on this project. There's a whole number of individuals that are working together to construct and advance this plan document. Myself, Michelle, and Elijah are on the call from Nebraska Department of Natural Resources. And then we have John, Stephanie, and Julie from HDR. And John is going to be leading today's meeting. And I think everyone should be able to see the slides. If you don't see the slides, please contact Michelle or myself and we'll get you squared away. Okay, without further ado, I'll pass the mic to John.
All right. Well, thanks, Adele. And thank you everyone for joining. As Adele said, if you are unable to see the presentation from where you're at today, I did want to note that this will be posted on the project website, and at the end of the meeting today, to show you for those that maybe haven't accessed it yet, I'll show you the project website where the information is posted, and more importantly, where we are posting draft sections of the document and the comment form for you to provide comments for this. So as Adele said, we got a pretty packed agenda. There's probably four main parts that we want to go over today. We're going to review some of the draft goals, objectives, and mitigation actions. A link was sent to you all to that document, and we're going to review those briefly today. We're going to talk about the approach to conducting the risk assessment. And Elijah has done a lot of work in pulling together some of the the claims, the floodplain claim histories, and we'll review some of that information. We'll give an update on the current status of plan sections, and then we'll talk about our next steps, looking forward to our next meeting on December 14th. So we will get right into it. So the goals, objectives, and mitigation actions, you'll see in that document that Adele sent there, the 4 goals are really split into 4 categories. We've got structure and infrastructure, we've got natural systems protection, we've got education and awareness programs, and we've got local plans and regulations. So those are kind of the 4 major categories for our goals and objectives. And those of you familiar with the 2013 plan, you'll see some notable changes to that. And those 4 categories of goals they more strongly align with FEMA's mitigation action categories. They do align with the recently adopted state hazard mitigation plan goals and objectives from January of 2021. The natural systems protection is more clearly defined in a discrete goal. There's a greater emphasis on the planning and collaboration aspects of flood hazard mitigation planning. And combined, they really are representative of a holistic approach to flood hazard mitigation. So those are some of the changes and some of the reasoning behind this categorization of goals and objectives. So we'll go through the goals and objectives first, and then we'll get to the mitigation actions. So from a structure and infrastructure goal, the goal is really to reduce or eliminate long-term flood risk to human life and property. That is the goal, and it's supported by 5 objectives. 1 is to promote and support initiatives that protect or exclude human habitation in flood zones, to improve emergency communication and flood warning systems, to manage the development and growth to minimize flood risks, and to reduce, improve, or mitigate existing structures in flood hazard areas. And the last one is to identify opportunities to mitigate vulnerable state facilities, local critical facilities, and other lifeline related facilities. So that are the 5 kind of primary objectives to support the structure and infrastructure goals. I'll move on to the second goal category, the natural and systems protection goal. And that's to preserve and enhance the natural and beneficial functions of floodplains is the goal. And it's supported by 3 objectives. To encourage the use of green and natural infrastructure and promote resilient and sustainable construction to reduce vulnerabilities, to encourage integration of future climate trends in planning and design, to promote the continued use of natural systems and features, and open space preservation in land use planning and development by local jurisdictions. So those are the 3 draft objectives to support that natural, preserving the natural function of floodplains. I was going to also note that I think they can enter in the chat box any comments that they may have. Yes, in the message. So if some of these jump out, if you want to make a note after we get through this, we'll talk in general about thoughts on goals, objectives, and mitigation actions, things that we may be missing, things that give you heartburn. So I would maybe take some notes or go ahead and enter them in the chat box as they pop up, so we don't lose those thoughts that you have.
Yes, John. And everything is subject to comment. The goals are subject to comment and criticism, the objectives, and the mitigation action.
Right. They're all in draft form. The third goal is the Education and Awareness Programs goal, promoting public awareness of flood hazard and post-flooding response. And this really ties in well with the open houses we had in June when we kicked off the project. And some of the comments we heard were related to the general public in wanting a greater understanding of flood risk, some of the response, how to mitigate some of those elements. So it fits very well. So the objective under this goal is simply provide educational opportunities to the public to learn about flood risk, flood mitigation, floodplain management, and post-flooding response. And then our final goal and objective is local plans and regulations. And this goal is to coordinate with the federal, state, and local partners for our flood mitigation planning and program efforts. And the objectives under that include providing technical assistance to communities, state agencies, and federal agencies to assist with the identification of flood hazards. So that element of really the identification. Provide best available floodplain mapping and regulatory data. So providing the technical data necessary for floodplain management and hazard mitigation. Coordinate with state and federal agencies regarding disaster response. That recovery side that we heard a lot about at the public meetings, and coordinate with state and local agencies on mitigation efforts to promote resiliency and sustainability. So those are the 4 supporting objectives for the local plan and regulation goal. So in a nutshell, those are our plans, the draft goals and objectives that you'll see in that document that Adele forwarded, and we'll move into the mitigation actions. And I guess from a local standpoint, one of the things that we want to emphasize is that the intent of this plan and these goals and objectives and action items are to serve as a menu of sorts for when you are preparing your local hazard mitigation plans and you're looking for some guidance on goals, objectives, and action items. That's the intent of this document. And so certainly your input on elements that you would like to see that should be included and incorporated statewide, we're very interested in hearing. On the mitigation actions, you'll also see some key changes for those of you that are familiar with the 2013 plan. First of all, again, there was an effort to align them better with FEMA's mitigation action categories. There's some discrete activities, again, to serve for local communities, the things that they could incorporate into their plan. And there are nice discrete elements so that they're measurable. You can track them. You can track achievements towards that. And that's pretty important when you get to a plan update or when you're evaluating a plan's effectiveness. Being able to measure your progress is a critical function of that feedback loop. Again, it's representative of a more holistic approach to flood mitigation, and we're really trying to prioritize and promote those mitigation actions that are low cost, high value, the biggest bang for the buck from a mitigation action standpoint. So I'm going to go through each of the 4 goal categories. I'm going to go through a select number of mitigation actions. Those of you that may have accessed the document that's available for comment, you'll see there is a litany of action items that are under each of the categories. I'm going to highlight some of the maybe 3 or 4 of each of the action items for each goal, supporting each goal today, but just be aware that there's a lot more action items defined. So we'll start in the same order again with the structure and infrastructure. 3 action items that we kind of pulled out that were key were: 1, limiting the percentage of impervious surface within redeveloped parcels and those under development. Again, trying to do what we can to encourage infiltration and eliminate some of the flashiness that impervious surfaces provide. Require that any fill within a special flood hazard area result in no net loss of floodplain storage by providing equal storage volume at or adjacent to the site. Again, a compensatory storage type action item. And then implement a safe room program to disincentivize use of basements within special flood hazard areas. So those are three of the types of mitigation actions, and again, there are a lot more that are in that document. The second goal category, the natural systems protection. The three action items under it: develop a land banking program for the preservation of natural and beneficial functions of flood hazard areas. The adoption of stream and wetland buffers or setback requirements, again, to preserve the natural function of those floodplains. For subdivision and large developments, require a stormwater management plan, limiting peak runoff for rainfall events, and limiting impacts to downstream channels and floodplains. Again, so trying to allow that land use with minimal impacts on the hydrology of the receiving stream and the function of the floodplains. Under the education and awareness programs, there are three action items we're highlighting under that. One is to annually distribute flood safety pamphlets to residents in flood-prone areas. Encourage landlords to do the same. Second action item, remind realtors of state requirements to disclose in writing whether the property is in a state flood hazard area or whether the property has incurred any damage due to flooding. And the third one is to identify transportation solutions for vulnerable populations, which are defined as low to moderate income, those living in compromised structures, older adults, individuals with mobility issues, and households with limited English proficiency. But again, identify transportation solutions for those populations in the event of a flood. Again, raising the education and awareness of the public. And then the final set of action items highlighting for the local plans and regulations: incorporate multiple levels of backup safety and plans should primary flood protections fail. So again, a level of redundancy to your flood protection efforts. Use transfer of development rights to allow developers to increase densities on parcels with low flood risk in return for keeping flood-prone areas vacant. Again, ways to responsibly develop areas without increasing flood risk. Collaborate with other jurisdictions to incorporate integrated flood management approaches that consider entire basins or watersheds into the local plan. Again, flooding pays no heed to political boundaries, and so having that integrated approach to management improves our ability to mitigate floods impacts. So that's a lot of information that we've provided. Again, the document is out on the website, and we will be, you can offer that input through the comment form, and I'll show that later. If there's comments right now, we would be more than willing for discussion topics of, other mitigation actions that have been effective in your community, from a goals, objectives, or an action standpoint. Have we missed anything? Does anything jump out that needs to be incorporated? So if you can take yourself off mute and jump in, you can type in the chat in any of those ways. Do we have anything in the chat?
John, we have a couple of items in the chat
Okay.
from John. I believe it's pronounced Gassman. I apologize if I said that wrong. We
Nope.
have one comment that is, I believe you have building codes under the structural goal. Would it fit better under local plans and regulations?
Okay. Building
Something.
codes and just from number 1 to number 4, I guess, in our numbering scheme. Okay. What was there another comment?
And then the second comment is, how can we encourage communities to incorporate flood mitigation planning into their community development or capital improvement plans?
So incorporate it into what most communities have as an ongoing effort.
Yeah. And how can we best encourage them to incorporate it?
Okay.
I have a few more coming in. I didn't know if you had anything specific to, or if they're just, we'll circle back to them in the future after we look at them. We have a comment from Betty Gillespie. The historic structure building elements, have there been any mitigation considerations specifically for historic buildings?
Historic structure. That's a great comment, and I don't believe so, but that's something we can consider. Historic structure specific mitigation.
And we have a question from Jeff Rowell. Can someone tell me where to find or where to look for the state recs of realtors to disclose if properties are within a state flood hazard area?
So I'm sorry, Julie, that I was taking a note there. The question is, can the citation?
Where can we find the
Okay.
look for the state recs of realtors to disclose if properties are within the flood area?
Okay.
So I don't know if you or if someone on the DNR side has that handy. Otherwise, we can circle back to him.
Yeah, I don't have that handy right now.
Okay.
But I will get back to him. And you've got his name,
yep.
Jeff. Okay.
Yeah, we can help you with that, Jeff.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts or comments out there on the mitigation actions? I know there's a lot of information that we went through. Any knee-jerk reactions?
We've got another comment here from Betty. She writes, I believe there are 52 towns in flood areas in Nebraska that are NR listed. Is that National Registry, Betty?
I'm just gonna mute myself. Yes, it is. And it's 52 downtowns. So like large districts that are listed.
And I'm sorry, that was 52 downtowns have a National Historic designation. Is that what the comment was?
Yes, so they are National Register Historic Places listed as downtown districts.
Yeah. Which emphasizes the importance of your first comment. Okay, well, if there's no other comments at this point, I'm going to push on and go into a couple of the remaining topics we wanted to get to. The next thing that I wanted to talk about, and certainly open for any comments or thoughts that you may have, is I wanted to walk through an approach that we're proposing to evaluate or conduct a statewide flood risk assessment. And so this will be on a statewide basis, and it's going to be used to inform this planning effort and include as part of the plan update. And we're going to, there's not going to be a lot of new modeling or anything like that, or data generation. We're going to utilize available data sets that we can, the two elements needed are the flood risks and what the impacts of are. So that includes things like defined floodplains. It includes parcel information and valuations. It includes critical and state-owned facilities. So those are data sets that are largely compiled, or that some of them we have compiled as part of this planning effort. And so we're going to utilize those. And we're going to do the risk assessment for the 100-year flood event. And so those of you that may be familiar with, well, I'll leave it at that. We're going to look at a single event, the 100-year. We're not going to look at a 500-year or in any more frequent events. But for this exercise, we'll use the 100-year event as the flooding risk. The first element that is really defining the flood risk. We're going to utilize the FEMA digital floodplain mapping that's available. And there are, I think, 7 or 8 counties in the state that still have paper maps. And the floodplain management section at the DNR has created flood awareness areas for those areas. And so we'll use those to supplement the FEMA digital mapping that is used elsewhere throughout the state. We are also going to look at areas protected by levees where they are available. And we'll talk about that. We actually aren't going to look at modeling levee breaches or any kind of complex modeling to define those as part of this effort for this risk assessment, but we're going to use the zone mapping and from the levee database, it has those areas protected by a levee. And so we're going to use that information to define the areas that are actually protected by levee systems within the state where it's available. So the way we're going to use this data is we've got the digital floodplain maps, and for the areas where we have the 100-year elevations defined, we're going to use that in conjunction with the statewide LIDAR data to get a depth of flooding, a spatial representation of depth of flooding across the state. And that's important because when we start looking at the damages and the impacts, that's really depth dependent. If you've got a structure, if you've seen typical depth damage curves, 6 inches of water in a structure causes so much damage. A foot of water causes an additional percentage. And so that depth part of it becomes very important. And so we're going to take the floodplain maps and the topography data and develop what's called a flood depth raster for each of the areas with defined floodplains. As I said, we're not going to conduct any breaches of levees or additional modeling to try and predict flooding depths in those areas protected by levees. We're going to focus on what we just have the flooding elevations defined for. And this is just an example of the typical data that's available in the various zones. This area happens to be the Omaha area with the Missouri River over here, the Platte River along the bottom, the Papio system, and the defined floodplain within that. And each of those, when you pull this data in from FEMA, There's an assigned water surface at the cross section, so you can assign elevations to the water surface. You've got the topography underneath, and that's how we create the depth rasters that are necessary for the flooding effects. This is just kind of a zoom in of the area. You can see the zone AE throughout here. You can see the levied reach. These areas in the hatched areas on each side, again, are those areas that are zone X, or in the newer maps, I think they're designated as zone D, I believe, is the areas protected by levees. But those are some of those areas that are at risk, but don't have elevations defined because they're protected by levees. So that's an example of kind of the different areas that we'll be looking at and the extents on which we'll be doing some economic evaluations. When we start, so that's how we're going to quantify the flood risk. What is the flooding depth spatially for each of these defined floodplains? So that assigns the flood risk. The next step is then looking at what are the flood impacts. And the types of thing we're going to look at are the critical facilities. As part of our initial efforts on this project, we had compiled a list of critical facilities throughout the state. We've also got the state-owned facilities. We have private property, and we've got a statewide parcel database that will be used. State roadways, what are the travel ways and those lifeline type highways that are at risk. And then some of the other elements that, threatened and endangered species habitat, and there's available shape files and how those may be at risk. And then as Betty stated, one of the important things is cultural and historic properties. That there's that designation has occurred, and what is the flooding risk, the exposure that those types of facilities have. If there are others that this group feels it would be good to be quantified, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know. But right now, I think that's kind of the main elements of the flooding impacts that we're looking at. Now this is just an example. This is an example of a project we actually did over in Iowa. But what you see here is the result of taking the defined floodplain and looking at the topography. And so this is actually a depth raster file. So this is actually what we're going to create. And you can see that, as you would expect, along the main channel, it's deeper. And as you get into the floodplain, it's shallower. And we'll overlay that with these various shape files, whether it be, in this case, it's parcel data that we have the information. And that parcel data has a bunch of information associated with it. It's got the valuation of the parcel. It's got the property, the improvements part of it. It's got the total assessed value, city, county, all of those elements that we need to categorize and get an economic value of the risk. Another example is by land use designation. And so when we start talking about the agricultural risks, to ag lands, we can use a land use coverage, again, to estimate what the economic risk is for agricultural production losses. So those are the types of GIS processing that we're going to use, again, using existing data sets that are available to assess the flooding risk. From an economic standpoint, we'll be preparing damage estimates for, we'll be summarizing the building loss exposure. And so that would be the total valuation of structures that would lie within a parcel that's impacted with that depth raster. And then we'll have estimates for the building and content loss. And as I said, we're going to use regional depth damage curves so that if we've got a parcel that has 4 foot of depth there's an associated percentage with what the building loss is. And there's a likewise depth damage curve for the contents of that building based on flooding depth, what percentage of the total content is lost. And so once we've defined those parcels, we've defined the valuation of the building, and then an estimate of the contents, which again, the content estimate is used as a percentage of the building value. It varies whether it's residential or commercial or industrial, but we'll have that total exposure. And then we'll use the depth damage curve that the depth raster provides, the depth on that parcel, to come up with what percentage of that building and its content is actually lost. We'll also look at agricultural production losses, and that's primarily going to be focused on crop loss due to flooding. One of the things that we're doing some research and trying to look at is, certainly like on the Missouri River in 2011, along the Platte and Loop and Elkhorn in 2019, where there was more than production losses. There was a lot of ag lands that at least temporarily, and temporary being many years, maybe permanently, have been lost to production because of all the sand deposited and things like that. So a way to reflect some of that, or at least account for it, we're doing some research to try and capture that risk. And then infrastructure losses, and that's the Department of Transportation has a lot of information on what their impacts have been, what their structure valuations are, and replacement costs associated with that, as well as some of the utilities, major utilities like trunk lines and gas lines and power distribution lines and things like that. So we'll be looking at again using the GIS tools, the floodplain information, and the shape files representing these infrastructure elements to estimate loss or risk of loss during a 100-year event. I think I talked through this. The damage estimates for the property will be developed for structures and contents based on what's available from the parcel valuation and replacement data. There's a general curve for estimating the content value based on the structure value and type. The depth raster grid provides flooding depth by the individual parcel, and your depth damage curve then provides a multiplier that represents the percent of the total structure value that's lost for a given depth of flooding. And so you get a spatial representation. As that depth decreases on the floodplain fringe, you may have less damage on those structures. So it's a way to reflect that. And there's a similar one for content. There are several other elements that we're not going to assign an economic value to from a risk standpoint, but from a critical infrastructure standpoint, we're going to identify those at-risk facilities from a critical facility standpoint. We've talked about just identifying those, and we can assign flood depths to those, but not doing a full-blown economic evaluation. And we've talked about, from a critical facility standpoint, kind of putting those into maybe 6 different bins. One would be transportation, one would be utilities, power, gas, water, sewer. Another one would be emergency management facilities, and those would be like shelters and community centers. The fourth one would be emergency response. So that would be like resource stockpiles, hospitals, fire and police stations. A fifth category would be vulnerable populations. So that would include schools and retirement homes. And then the sixth category would be like dams and levees, actual flood mitigation infrastructure. So we've tentatively decided or have selected from, if you've seen the maps and on the website, on the storing map, there's a litany of critical facilities defined throughout the state. We wanted to kind of bin them into manageable categories. And so we've come up with those 6 to represent those. State roadways, again, what we want this to do is facilitate in the local planning efforts, starting thinking about critical route evaluations, and in the local flood hazard mitigation plans, defining those and make sure that they're identified, and potentially mitigation actions or improvements are required, again, to provide access and egress out of a community. So a critical route evaluation, looking at state roadways that are impacted. For the levees, again, as I said, we aren't doing the modeling for those areas protected behind the levees, so we don't really have a way to determine what the flooding depth is, but we're going to come up with the property values and the valuation of improvements behind levees that they provide protection for. And that's a way just to determine, or I guess show the value that flood mitigation provides. And then, as I said, we'll look at cultural and historic properties, T&E critical habitat, those types of maybe non-monetary or non-structural elements. So that's kind of the approach that we're looking at, from both determining the flood risk, determining what the flood impacts, and the kind of economic and non-economic evaluations we're going to be conducting. We're going to categorize and summarize things at the county level for reporting, and we'll have tabular summaries as well as statewide maps that are done at a county level, showing some of these risk assessment results. So I think that's all I had from kind of a description of our risk assessment. Any questions or comments that came through on the chat or that anyone has right now?
We do have a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
We have one, and this one might be more geared towards Adele and the state staff, but it says, I noted one of the goals under the structural objective included building or repairing levees and levee-like structures. In the past, the state has shied away from funding these types of projects. Is that a change?
Again, I'll turn my video back. This is Adele with DNR. These are actions that locals may select from as appropriate for their jurisdiction. This is a little bit separate from funding selection.
Thanks, Adele. The next question was, what are you considering as a critical facility for this plan?
Yeah, so that's and maybe Adele can provide a little more information, but what we've done is we've gone through the local hazard mitigation plans and have assembled what the local communities have identified as critical facilities. And maybe that question was asked, it might have been asked prior to when I kind of went into kind of those 6 categories of critical facilities, and hopefully that kind of defined and provided a little more information on, those 6 categories, from transportation, roadway and rail bridges, the utilities. You've got your power, your gas, water, sewer, certainly treatment plants, lift stations, well fields. From an emergency management, those were the shelters and community centers, libraries. From emergency response, that was the fire, and the police stations, hospitals, staging areas for resource stockpiles. The vulnerable populations we talked about were schools and retirement homes, and then the dams and levees are all kind of under the umbrella of what we've defined as critical facilities.
Then I'm assuming this question is related to critical facilities as well. David Pearson, feel free to correct me if I am misunderstanding, but the question is, can you add federal facilities?
That's a good question. We can look into that. We would need to, I'm sure there has to be a database available.
I don't remember what's, this is Dave. I don't remember what slide it was. There was a slide talking about which facilities will be analyzed for flood threat. State facilities was on there. So it was not that one. Yeah, that
Probably
one.
this one.
David, which agency do you represent? Or
I'm with the
jurisdiction?
National Weather Service in Valley. Our facility is in the floodplain, which is why I bring it up.
There's a couple dimensions at play here. Partly the legislature that directed the piece of legislature that directs us to adopt or develop and adopt a new statewide flood hazard mitigation plan specifically calls out state facilities. And then in the local hazard mitigation plans, again, we're looking at local jurisdictions and the facilities that they are responsible for, the community members that they're responsible for. So I guess that's why our focus or our discussion has been regarding state and local facilities. But as John said, that's a good question regarding federal jurisdictional issue.
Let's see, there were a couple other questions in here, Julie. One of them was looking at from a critical facility standpoint. Are we going to identify? Oh, it's a matter of looking at a 500-year event. That's a good question. I think right now the intent is to look at a 100-year, primarily because we've got that probably the greatest statewide coverage in that being defined. And we hadn't contemplated looking at a less frequent risk event for critical facilities, but I can talk with Adele and we can see if that's something we want to do. That's a good comment.
We have a general comment that FEMA doesn't see basements as living space, and this should change. For FEMA approved damage assistance funding, a building must be flooded at 18 inches or more on a main floor.
Okay.
We have a comment about the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, may be a good resource for critical infrastructure.
Okay.
And then a note that FEMA released interim guidance recently about mitigating structures above base flood elevation plus 1 foot. Do we need to integrate that into this plan?
Again, that could be something in the mitigation actions at the local. We can look at including that BFE plus 1 foot. Okay. If that, we've got one more topic and information I wanted to go through, and we've got about 10 minutes, and I wanted to get you out on time, so I'm going to move forward. But certainly, this will be posted as you think about the risk assessment and the approach we outlined, and you have some additional questions. I think the 500 year for critical facilities was excellent. Actually, all the comments were excellent. So please feel free to drop an email to Adele or myself. Elements on considering that.
And for the comments, just a reminder, we do have a designated comments form available for download from the project website, and we would prefer that you put your comments in that standard form and then email it to us rather than a free form email.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Adele. And at the end of this, I will show people how to get to that before we wrap up. So as part of the plan, we're going to look at the flood claim history analysis. And so Elijah's done a lot of great work on this using the National Flood Insurance Program's pivot system. And so he's obtained a lot of the data you're going to see here, which is through September 23rd, I think is when he downloaded it, of 2021. So we've got comprehensive data starting from 1978. And 78 was used because that's when the NFIP officially became part of FEMA. We looked at, or Elijah, I'm going to use the collective we, Elijah. We looked at analyzing map claims at the county level. And so the things we looked at: total policy count and average coverage per policy, total claim count and net payments, and the frequency of claims per policy, as well as then looking specifically at the 2019 flood insurance claims and net payments, and then looking at some of the claims and policies by flood zone. So I've got a series of figures here. I'm going to walk through fairly quickly. Again, this will be posted. Couple things for input or questions you may have about any of this, as well as if there's some additional ways to look at this data that may be informative and help you in preparation of your local plans. A couple things on the limitations. These are only policies and losses from participating NFIP communities. Just a reminder, the data is not static. So there's community participation that we started in 1978, but communities came on at various times since 1978, and likewise, individual policies within participating communities, they can be added or removed by policyholders at any time. A lot of it is required if you have a federal-backed mortgage, and once the mortgage pays off, they may no longer have their policy. So that kind of thing occurs on and off. So the data set's not static. The number of policies may not represent all of the structures at risk or that were damaged. Again, some people may elect not to participate and have incurred damage. So this is just what is done through the NFIP is what we're going to be looking at. So this is a statewide coverage. This is the total number of policies in the state. As you can see, it varies greatly. Some of it is maybe related to flood hazard. Some of it may be related just to flood, the population. This is the average total coverage per policy. And you can see it varies from the lowest category, that $300 to $50,000, all the way up to $325,000 to $375,000. And so it varies considerably from the coverage amount throughout the state. This is the total number of claims since 1978. And so you can see, as you'd expect, along the Platte, Elkhorn, Missouri, again, part of it's flood risk driven, part of it's population driven. This is a way to kind of normalize that and saying of the county's total number of policies, the total number of claims divided by the total number of policies at the county level. And so you'll see a way of kind of normalizing it for the number of policies. Again, the Missouri is hit pretty hard down here along the blue. This is the total net payments since 1978. The darkest is Sarpy County, and that's 14 to 21 million has been paid. Buffalo County is another one in the 8 to 14 million. Just an idea of the values of the payments that have been made. Now, specific to 2019, this is just the total number of losses claims in 2019. And you can see, and you get down to Dodge, Douglas, and Sarpy, there were, between 200 and 300 lost claims from that event alone. In the surrounding areas, vary from 50 to 100 to 20 to 50 on down the line. Again, the lost payments, you can see again, Sarpy County was the leader in the clubhouse on that as well, with 10 to 15 million in lost payments. And it kind of follows the claim map pretty closely. This is then just an analysis by flood zone. So you've got your policies by flood zone on the left. And as you can see, the majority of the policies are in zone A. And likewise, when you get to the claims by flood zone, you also see the majority of the claims are in that designated zone A. So some of the information, there's a draft document that will be posted this week that kind of has the background behind this and the representation of those, as well as all of these figures and some tabular values of the top 10 counties and things like that from a historical flood claims perspective. So I would encourage you to review that and again, tell us if there additional information that can be gleaned from this data that would help you in your planning efforts. I'm going to push on, and so I can show how to do this quick, and we'll get to the questions as we wrap up. But from a plan documents for review, again, the documents are posted out on the website. There are going to be 2 sections. I think there's one out there now. The flood claim analysis will be posted yet this week, and those are going to be available now through October 29th. And then in the upcoming, before our next meeting, there's going to be 2 additional documents, plan sections. One of them is going to be the regulatory framework evaluation. Another one is the local capability assessment, and we'll be posting those out there, and you'll get a notification of those when they're available. I was going to quickly see if I can show I can exit out of this. Let's see if I can open up, there we go. So if you click on that link right there, this takes you to the floodplain management homepage. If you're trying to find it just from the general DNR site, you can go into the floodplain management page. And if you go to the bottom, you'll see the icon for the flood hazard mitigation plan. And you click on that and it takes you to this page. And always over here is where you'll see the available documents that are ready for review. And you can click on those. And this is just pops up. This is the goals and objectives and action items. And for example, here's the mitigation actions. I said we had only looked at 3 for each. You'll see there's a laundry list under each of these mitigation actions. So those are available for review. And as Adele said, there's a reviewer comment form that we would like you to use so that we can track and close out comments. And you would just click on this and you'll see when it opens, you've got your name and agency, and we need that in case there's a clarification of the comment. The document section, whether it's the hazard, whether it's the flood claim analysis or it's the goals, objectives, and mitigation items. If there's a line or some reference in there, and then if it's to a specific item, and then what the comment is. And we'll use this to track, and we'll add a column here in response to make sure that we've addressed all comments. And then when you're done, you can you see Adele's email address there. You can email that to her. On the risk assessment approach, if you have comments on that, by all means, you can enter that in, your name, the risk assessment approach, and just your general comment. Again, a way just to keep track of those in a fashion that we can catalog and make sure we're addressing comments. Let me get out of there. A couple, before we wrap up, I got about 3 minutes left. One of them is Adele wanted to put out a request in our floodplain, our flooding history section. There were some comments about some areas of the state where we were lacking some information on historical flooding. And those are listed here: Verdigris Creek, South Platte River, Pebble Creek, Red Willow Creek, Wood River, the Middle South and Lower Loop Rivers, and Medicine Creek. And so we're really looking for input for those of you in those areas or have information on historical flooding. Please reach out to Adele. And as always, this is the same as before from the 2019. If you've got any of your risk assessment data, flood events other than 2019, anecdotal, we're always looking for that additional information. Okay, last slide. What we're going to be doing over the next couple months till we get together again, we'll be incorporating the comments on the funding, which we've already received, the mitigation strategies, that's the goals, objectives, and actions that you will be providing, the flood claim analysis and the local capability assessment, again, that you'll be providing prior to our next meeting. We're looking at finalizing the planned maintenance process, planning process, and flood risk type sections. We're going to begin the risk assessment efforts that we just talked about the approach to today. And our next meeting on December 14th, that's a Tuesday again at 10 a.m., we're going to be discussing the regulatory framework evaluation, the state capability assessment. Again, those are two of the sections that will be provided. We'll also be talking about the primary state programs and programs administered by other state and federal agencies at our meeting on the 14th. One thing about the regulatory framework evaluation, one of the reasons we moved that up to December is we certainly want to get input if there are some things that, if it becomes apparent that maybe some legislative action would be of benefit. We want to be able to do that in December so we can get some thoughts on and potential legislation that could be considered in the next session. So that's why we kind of moved that regulatory framework. So when you're reviewing that section, please keep that in mind on thoughts about potential legislation as required. Our future meetings and where we are, we're going to look at our state capability assessments. Our meeting in February is one we're going to start looking at the results of the risk assessment, and we'll come back into the mitigation strategies. And then the draft plan review will occur at our April meeting. I think that's all I had. We'll stay on to answer some of the questions if there's some in the chat that we need to. I apologize, we ran over about 4 minutes, but you're welcome to stay on and we'll address those now. If you've got some of did more comments come in, Julie?
We had a couple that came in. We had one question that came in that Elijah did answer, but just for everyone to hear, the question was, will the flood claims analysis include repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss structures? Suggest discussion of unmitigated RL/SRL versus mitigated. And Elijah did say that, yes, there is a repetitive loss analysis included in the flood claims and analysis.
Okay, great.
And we did have a general question. How would the state benefit if more communities participated in the NFIP?
Adele, do you have a crack at that?
Sure. Thanks, John Gassman, for that question. Well, when a community participates in an NFIP, they make an agreement with the federal government to enact certain policies at the local level and enforce those policies at the local level, and it protects these regulations and the implementation of them then protects community members and structures at a certain known point from an amount of flood hazard. So when you protect structures and people, throughout watersheds and in multiple jurisdictions, you also protect larger areas or downstream areas from the impacts of flood hazard, or at least you lessen the degree to which they are impacted by flood hazard. And of course, not only that, but then folks get access to federally backed flood insurance.
Great. All right. Well, if that's all the comments, again, feel free to drop us an email if you have any questions about this meeting information and content. I didn't show that, but there is a site out there on the it'll be in a tab like this. We'll have you'll see in October 12th, 2021, from the development committee, the plan development committee. The materials in this presentation will be provided under there if you wanted to review it. There's also the monthly project updates that kind of, again, our path forward is a synopsis of what's in that information. So you're more than free to access that to keep you up to date on things. So with that, Adele, is there anything else?
Sure. We don't yet have the flood claims and the draft flood claim analysis up there yet, but we will.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you December 14th.